Hello and welcome to Lesson 2 of Resources and Energy Resource Management. This session is going to be looking at the global distribution of resources. So we are specifically looking at where certain resources are located around the world. It's not going to go into loads and loads of different resources. It's going to focus on just 7 resources, quite generic ones. Okay, so we're going to be looking at a map of the world, and we're going to try and hopefully recognize patterns of distribution of resources, as well as pick up a few geographical skills along the way. So write today's title and learning objectives, and then when you're finished you can unpause the screen. Okay, so this is a bit of a recap as well as an introduction. So recap to last lesson, which is where we were classifying resources, and what we've got here is just a list of different abiotic or biotic resources which will feature during today's lesson. So what I'd like you to do is just work out which ones of these are biotic and which ones are abiotic, and that will refresh your memory about what those two terms mean. So pause the screen to do that, and I'll reveal the answer when you've unpaused the screen. Okay, so going through them, iron ore here is an abiotic resource. Gold is also abiotic. Coffee is a biotic resource. Coffee beans grow on trees. Oil is an abiotic resource. Diamonds, also abiotic. Wheat is a biotic resource. It's a plant, it grows in fields. Forests are also a biotic resource. And coal is an abiotic resource. Okay, so now we've got and been introduced to these 8 different factors, the 8 different sections, and we're actually going to start to look in a little bit more detail at some of these sections, and not just in detail about some of them in terms of what they're useful for, but where they are specifically. So here is a world map, and this is a fairly old world map, and also it's incredibly lacking in detail. There are places that far more places, for example, where gold is found than just appears on this map. But what does this map tell you? I mean, I'll pretty much give it away already. It just shows you where some of the large-scale deposits of various resources can be found around the world. So there's 2 categories on this particular map. The circles are energy-based resources. So you've got coal, gas, petroleum or oil-based resources, and uranium, which is what we use for nuclear power. And then you've got mineral resources, so they are essentially from the lithosphere. So mining things. So you've got bauxite, which we use to make aluminium, copper, gold, iron ore, and silver. Now there are far more mineral resources than just these 5, but these are 5 that are quite well used, valued resources. Just to show you again, just to give you a snapshot. So if you look at this particular world map, there is a bit of a pattern forming in certain areas and not so much in others. So let's go with petroleum. Okay, this essentially is oil-based resources. If you know much about oil and petroleum, where you might find it, lots of it is found in the Middle East, and there's a lot of conflict that goes on in the Middle East as a result of their oil-based resources. So you could see places like Saudi Arabia, for example, have a vast number of Syria here on the border there, have got large deposits of oil. But so has North Africa, the west coast of Africa, and parts of South America, just off the coast of Brazil, for example, and just off the coast of Peru in South America here. But again, the USA also. So it's dotted around in certain parts with a cluster, and that's a good term to use, a cluster of deposits here. We've actually got our own oil reserves just off the coast of the east of the UK in the North Sea, which we've got some, and Norway also have some in their waters. When it comes to other ones, though, there is definitely more of a pattern. So a very clear pattern emerges in these orange triangles. You can see kind of North America and Canada here, goes down the west coast, and then a definite linear pattern down the west coast of South America, and that is copper. So there's huge copper reserves all that run along sort of the Andes mountain range there. But again, that's just one area of pattern. There is much more copper around the world. So you've got some deposits in Australia, some in the southern half of Africa, you've got some in Central Asia, for example, and even some in kind of Eastern and Southern Europe. So copper deposits there. Now, there are numerous deposits, again, all over the world of different minerals, and we're going to use this map as kind of a basis for me to talk to you about some of these minerals and these resources in a bit more detail. So you're going to be understanding, hopefully, that the world's natural resources are unevenly distributed, because they're not in the, sometimes they are in a linear pattern, but there's certainly not anywhere that's got everything all locked up within its rocks. But we also need to be looking at why the location of natural resources varies. So it's not just the fact that they do vary, and we're going to describe that. We're also going to try and identify reasons why the resources vary, why they have found where they're found, because they form under certain conditions, and not everywhere has had those conditions. So this is on 365, this handout map. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be looking at 7 different areas, and that's why it's been divided up into 7 sections, which you are going to be writing about not only where these resources are found, but also why those resources are found in those locations. And I'm also providing you with all the information that you're going to need to complete this handout. So you need to find this handout on 365 if you can, and if you can't find it, you could always just screenshot this map from this slide, okay, and then put it in the middle of an A3 page or something like that, where you can do it on a Word document and print it out later. So there are 7 sections, and I'm going to provide you with the information. So there is a carousel of information which we would have used in lessons as like a proper carousel. You go from table to table, but I've provided the whole PowerPoint in the Jog Vlogs folder of 365. So get yourself onto there. It's a PowerPoint, and all of the PowerPoint information is in there. Again, if you can't find that, you will just need to fast forward to the latter stages of this video, because I actually do provide every single one of them in this video anyway. So if you'd rather just wait for them to appear on the screen, then great, but if you want to get the resources to use them now, then like I said, they're available as a copy. So the title of your map is the Global Distribution of Resources, and distribution just means spread. And then you're going to use the information on that stuff in the Jog Vlogs folder, or later on the PowerPoint, to not just list where these natural resources are located, and that's going to require some map skills, distribution skills in terms of describing, but also you're going to be locating on, you're going to be discussing why they are found. They're providing me reasons. You don't have to do a great deal of thinking, because I have given you the information. So there's, I'm not expecting you to know instantly why gold deposits are found where they are. So read the information carefully, and all the answers will reveal themselves. So there are 3 categories that are going to be included within this particular presentation, and that is energy resources, and we're going to focus on oil and coal. We're not going to look at gas reserves. Mineral resources, so iron ore, gold and diamonds. And then biosphere resources, so farming land for wheat and coffee, and forestry, so trees, essentially, for either timber or all the other various reasons that we use trees for. So those are the 3 categories, and if you'd like to colour code your resources as according to whether they are energy, minerals or biosphere resources, then please feel free. I'm sure you can make your maps look really, really nice. Okay, so there's the instructions, and now what I'd like you to do is find the information which is going to essentially help you populate this particular handout. Okay, I've got an example for you here. There you go. Look, I've put oil there. It's probably a bit too wordy, but what you can see is in my little section for oil, I've put the main reserves are found in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia, so oil reserves over here, and Iran, estimated to have reserves of more than 100 billion barrels. Now, you're not going to know that until you read the information, because the information tells you that. Following the Middle East are Canada and the United States. So there's more oil reserves over here. You can see from these little blobs. There's some up there. Africa and the region occupied by the former Soviet Union. Oil is found in areas made of rocks formed by deposition, so sedimentary rocks. So there you go. This is why we find oil here. This is where we find oil. So you've got where and why. And the reason why is not huge, but it is within the text, so you need to find it. So oil is found in areas made of rocks formed by deposition, because essentially oil is just decomposed sea creatures, and so as it's not been able to properly decompose, it's sort of fossilized and created these fossil fuels, and oil is, as we know, a fossil fuel, and that's why we call it a fossil fuel. Coal is another fossil fuel. That's the fossilized remains of carbon, really, that was made in sort of tropical forests millions of years ago. in the Carboniferous period. It's called the Carboniferous period because of that carbon stored in the coal and the oil, which has been locked underneath the earth, and we've been hacking at for years in the last 200 years or so. Anyway, there you go. There is an example, and you need to complete your handout. It will take you a good chunk of time. I'd say 35 to 40 minutes to complete. So crack on, pause the screen, but there is more to come. So when you're ready, unpause the screen, and then I will talk you through the last part of the session. Okay, so hopefully you've got a completed A3 sheet with all 7 of the different resources that we highlighted in the task. So remember, they were oil and coal, iron ore, gold and diamonds, farming and forestry. So now you should have a completed sheet, so like this but full of stuff. I'm going to just utilize the fact that you've had to look at resources which have a variety of presentation technique, ways to display data. And you're going to just use this as a quick chance to evaluate those data presentation techniques, and I'll kind of talk you through it and do it with you. So obviously the maps were displayed on those resources that you had, and I'll show you those again in a moment. Now each one of them, I want you to look at it carefully, and I'm going to talk you through the usefulness of the map specifically. So don't worry about the text. You've been using the text all this session. It's the map specifically that you hopefully have provided kind of a visual stimulus alongside the notes you've been making. So try and consider which map is useful, which one's the least useful, and try and think of reasons why. Okay, because this is something that can appear in paper 3. Now I know this topic is in paper 2, not in paper 3. But in paper 3, they love looking at things like graphs or maps and saying what is good about this particular data presentation technique, maybe what's not so good about it, how could you improve it. So just by having practice of doing that, by looking at these maps that we've utilised in this lesson, is just a good way to practice doing this, while we've got an opportunity. So here you go, here's the first map. So you probably focused when you were writing your notes on just the writing, and some of you may have even completely ignored the map. But what you've got here is a kind of a map, a bit of an angle, a bit of a sort of a jaunty angle, and you can see, hopefully clearly see anyway, it's a world map that's been divided up into 7 different kind of regions. So you've got North America, Latin America, which they include South America in, Western Europe, which is green, Africa in yellow, the Middle East is sort of a grey-blue colour, Eastern Europe is brown, and Asia and Australasia, or Oceania, is orange. Okay, so look at this map, try and think about what you consider as useful about this map and maybe some of the limitations of it. And while you're thinking, just pause the screen, and when you're ready, unpause the screen, and I'll kind of talk you through some of it. Okay, so advantages of this map that sort of jump out to me is it's very obvious where most of the oil reserves are located. Clearly, they're in the Middle East. You can see by the size of that bar in the Middle East. And the second most is South or Latin America, followed closely by Asia, and Eastern Europe. They're classing that as ridiculous. Eastern Europe and Asia, and then you've got Southern Asia and Oceania or Australasia, followed by the North America, and then us in Western Europe have very few of the world's oil reserves that produce very little. So it just shows you that distribution, that spread of just how much actually oil is in the Middle East. So even though there are places where there are oil deposits, it doesn't necessarily mean there's lots of oil in them. There's an oil deposit in the North Sea, but clearly not that much oil globally comes from there. And by far, the biggest contributor of oil production in the world, is that Middle East area. So things that are not so good about this map. Well, firstly, it's classing the brown area as Eastern Europe when actually it's Northern Asia and Eastern Europe collectively. So it's a bit of an inaccurate labelling of the map, and also it's not hugely clear which countries contribute to that amount. So, for example, if you look at Latin America, as they call it, South America really, the vast majority of that really comes from Brazil and Peru. It doesn't really come from other parts of South America. And also, this map is out of date because we're discovering oil deposits all the time. Just off the coast of Brazil, the east coast of Brazil, they've actually found masses and masses of oil deposits underneath a sort of salt crust. the seabed, which they're managing to access, and that's going to be worth millions and millions of barrels of oil over the next few years. So actually, their contribution of oil production is probably going to be going up quite considerably. And as the years go by, more of the oil reserves will run out, and therefore you'll find that these bars will adjust year to year. So it's only a very clear snapshot in time, as well as being a bit inaccurate. But it does clearly show you, like I say, some things. So there's some advantages and disadvantages of this map technique. Okay, the next one, coal. The advantages of this particular technique are that it's really clear. It's very obvious where the major coal deposits in the world are. They're the black bits, and they stand out amongst the white map. So it's a very, very contrasting map. Disadvantages of it, it's oversimplified. It doesn't show you which nations hold the oil reserves. There's no figures attached to it. There's not a key that tells you how many millions of tons of coal deposits there are. So it's useful in the sense that of just knowing where they are, but it doesn't really tell you how much of their of coal there is. And for example, India has quite large amounts of coal deposits. Yet you'd look at that and think that India was kind of a poorer cousin related to places like South America, for example, where there are very few coal deposits, but it doesn't really tell you the whole picture about just how much is within that area. Okay, next one. This one is a choropleth map, we call this. So it's color-coded, different shades of red or brown for some reason, that show you where the iron ore is found. So China is the brown country where most of the iron ore or iron production is. And then you've got the red areas, so you've got Brazil and Australia and Russia and India. Then you've got sort of the darker peach, so Canada and the United States of America and Mexico and Sweden. And then you've got the sort of lighter shades of pink and then grey. So iron ore absolutely shows you that iron ore is found quite heavily in China. But if you look at the title, it actually says map showing the global distribution of iron ore, but that's not actually right, because this is about iron production. So although this map is very clear, again it shows you where there is most iron ore being produced, it doesn't actually show where the most iron ore is found, because because it's there, it doesn't mean that we're using it or not using it. So there is iron ore in the UK, for example, and this would make you think that actually, there's no iron ore in the UK. However, the biggest issue with this is that the scaling is slightly different. So if you look at the grey countries, they go from 0 to 99,000 tonnes of production. It's not none, but it's 0 to 99,000 tonnes. So that's the scale of kind of 100 roughly. Whereas you go to the next level and it goes up by 10, so 10 times. It's kind of logarithmic almost. So from the second section, so the grey areas up to 99,000 tonnes. Then the next level up, the sort of light pink, that could be up to 10,000 tonnes. So, sorry, not 10,000 tonnes, 10,000, so 10 million tonnes. So it goes from, the scale is crazy, it goes from 99,000 tonnes to 10 million tonnes, potentially, in one fell swoop. And then from there, it goes to the dark peach, it goes up to 100 million tonnes. Then we're talking about going up to 5 billion tonnes, and then 5 billion plus. So even though, okay, you've got the UK here, let's imagine that the UK produces 1,000 tonnes, the next one up could be, even though it's just the next scale up, could be 10 million tonnes. So the UK, 1,000 tonnes, and North Africa, 10 million tonnes. It's a huge difference, even though they're points on the scale just right next to each other. So I don't know if I've explained that very well, but the scale is not great, I would say, is the problem with this map. But again, it's very clear where iron production is taking place. Right, very, very similarly this one, but again, it's choropleth. They are all shades of sort of yellow-y colour, and it shows you where gold is primarily produced. Now this one is like the last one, but I would say it's much better, purely because the intervals are much closer together. So less than 10,000 tonnes, 10 to 20, 20 to 50, 50 to 100, 100. So it still has quite a bit of scale issue, but the issue is nowhere near the same as the iron ore issue. And again, it's nice that you can see the areas where they are, but again, labelling would be useful as well, wouldn't it? If if you're not sure about your global geography, it would be nice to know that this is South Africa, and this is Australia, and this is China, and this is the USA. Okay. This is a different type. This is what we call a proportional symbol map. So the size of the circle relates to the millions of carats, and carats is the kind of size of the diamond that we would measure. So you can see very clearly you've got massive diamond production in the southern half of Africa. You've also got quite a lot of diamond production in Russia, loads in Canada, loads in Australia, but very little else. And then you've got two other areas to this graph which show you the change in diamond production. So this is good because it's very visual, tells you very clearly where is producing lots of diamonds in terms of their carats, but it's also showing you the change in diamond production across the different areas. So that again, so Russia, you can see diamond production in Russia has increased. African countries, it's decreased. Okay, and overall, it's decreased quite considerably. You'd say by about a fifth. So there you go. That shows you some really good stuff. But the difficulty, or the thing that lacks clarity here, that I would say essentially is that these could be getting in each other's way. It's not very clear which countries each of these proportional symbols is linked to. So that's the thing here. If these proportional symbols, because there's so much activity going on in the southern half of Africa, you can't actually see where Botswana is, and you can't see where Namibia is, or South Africa, or Lesotho. So you can't see where all of these places are because actually the symbol is in the way of the country. So there you go. That takes a bit away from the clarity of that slightly. So yeah, unfortunately, no diamonds found in the Great British Isles, which would be really nice, wouldn't it? Right, okay, so next we are looking at this map. So very similarly really to the map that showed coal deposits, this is just one colour over a kind of a white baseline map. And that shows you where forestry is around the world. Now again, nice and clear is one of the major advantages of this one. What I would say is that it doesn't talk to you about different types of forest, and there are many types of forest, and some forests are far more productive than others. So for example, tropical rainforest, which you can find in places like the Congo Basin excuse me, and the Amazon Basin, are far more productive than say the boreal forests or taiga, T-A-I-G-A, which stretch essentially across this temperate band of the northern hemisphere. And little parts of places like Patagonia, for example. So although it does tell you that there is forest there, it doesn't necessarily tell you just how much forest and what type of forest, which would be more useful information. Okay, and lastly, you've got two for the price of one here. This one shows wheat and coffee production. So on the left-hand side, it's kind of a mix really of a few of the maps we've seen. It's got a white baseline, but it does have data. And it's also got choropleth mapping, so it's got darker the green, the more productive or the more output of wheat in that area. So what you can see is that the sort of eastern area of China chucks out a lot of wheat. The northern part of India chucks out quite a lot of wheat as well. Largely, wheat production is concentrated in Europe. You've got parts of North America and central Canada there, and some parts of South America. Clearly, wheat production occurs around the temperate bands, sort of further north or south of the tropics, because again the climate conditions make it suitable for wheat production. But effectively, this shows us quite a lot about wheat production and where you'd find it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're the only places that wheat can be produced, because it's a choice crop. It's a crop that you can choose to plant. Now, there is a very good reason why Europe grows a lot of wheat, whereas maybe Asia doesn't grow quite as much, although you do have quite a big sort of couple of regions in China and India. And that's because it's not as much of a favoured crop. So wheat is something which goes into bread and goes into pasta, and it's a product which we use quite a lot in beer, for example. So wheat is something which goes into many products, including like alcohol-based products, like whiskey. Is based around wheat as well. Whereas if you go to Asia, the products that they tend to eat, or their main kind of staple carbohydrate, because wheat is a carbohydrate, is rice. And so even though these areas may well be able to grow wheat, they don't want to. They grow rice instead because people will eat more rice than they will wheat. Now, it might be a bit of a stereotype, but there is much, much higher rice production in these parts of the world than there is wheat production. And even their alcoholic drinks, so they produce beer and whiskey. Drink things like rice wine, so they ferment that down as well. So you can see a bit of a difference between these areas, but this is probably because it's more out of choice of what you grow, as well as there being sort of different growing conditions around the world. So this map again shows us very clearly where is, but it doesn't tell us about why people are choosing to grow wheat, and ties in about cultural preference. Now this, I love maps like this, but that's because I kind of know where I'm looking, and I've got a vague or pretty good idea, I'm a geography teacher, of where the places around the world are located, which you would absolutely need to have in order to decipher this map. So this shows coffee production in the world, and it's a world map. So what this means is that the size of the country has been distorted according to the amount of millions of 60 kilogram bags of coffee. So what this shows me, and believe it or not, this big green bit here, that's Brazil. So this, on this map, is just here. But Brazil produces masses of coffee, and parts of South America and Latin America as well. So this is all kind of Mexico and Costa Rica and places like that. You've got Colombia, Peru. All of these areas down here are the major coffee producing parts of the world. So Colombian beans are used in things like McDonald's. They use Arabica beans from Colombia. But you've also got some coffee production in Africa, which is this red section here. And you've got some coffee production in Asia. Again, I actually don't know where this is. I'm thinking this might be... Crikey, I actually have no idea. It could be China. Yeah, maybe. I think it is China. I think it's China. Goodness me, I'm looking a fool here. But that shows you. It very clearly tells you the parts of the world where coffee production is the most. But the difficulty is that you are going to struggle to decipher this map. I mean, the UK is this little squashed bug up here. Okay, so, and places like Australia, look down here. That's Australia. It looks nothing like Australia, so unless you knew that was Australia because of your geographical location, then you would have no idea where Australia was. So it's not the clearest of maps unless you know your geography quite well. And even I know my geography quite well, and I was struggling to identify this as China. So there we go. That summarises those maps and usefulness of those maps. But look, there's a good variety there for you to pay attention to and learn from. So, lastly, just to summarise, and this was meant to be something where you could reflect yourself, and in class I would normally, but just to summarise really for you, to give you an example of how you can present information and how you can answer questions in an exam, so exam scenario-based questions, you might have a question, for example, like describe the distribution of gold. Now, your A3 handout that you've completed should give you a really good description of where gold is. And it could be worth maybe up to 3 marks here. So distribution of gold is uneven. Tick. Pretty much that'll work for you everywhere, by the way. Worth a mark. And then identifying the major areas of gold production. So gold production is mostly in the northern hemisphere. That's also worth a mark. However, Australia, South Africa and Peru also produce a lot of gold, and they're in the southern hemisphere. China is currently the largest producer of gold. However, the largest area of gold extraction is in South Africa, the Witwatersrand Basin. There we go. So I've given you loads and loads of detail, going from being quite generic, it's uneven, then to it's in the northern hemisphere, then to very specific locations. So if you could answer this same question, but rather than gold, you put oil, and rather than oil you put coal or forestry or whatever, then that would be something which you should maybe practice. That would prepare you nicely for an exam situation. You could also be asked about explaining the distribution of gold or oil or coal or forestry or farming land or whatever. So this is just as simple as a basic reason. So rare valuable minerals like gold are often found in areas of volcanic activity, and again that actually works well for you for a few of those minerals, like diamonds for example, due to ground movement or rising magma and or superheated water solutions. So there you go. Gold is formed in volcanic areas because of rising magma. That would get you a couple of marks. But this is all about the why is it found there, and this is the where is it found. And that's what you've got for every single one of those 7 different resources which we've covered in this lesson. So make sure for each of them, given an exam question, you could give it a good description and a brief explanation of where and why. And then lastly, to summarise, this one I haven't done for you, thinking back to the maps that we've seen, could you think of an advantage and a disadvantage for every single map? If you went through them again, would you be able to pick out something that is good about it and something that maybe is not so good about it? Alright, that finishes lesson 2. So again, it's been a bit of another mammoth session, and you've produced another great set of notes, hopefully, anyway, from your A3 sheet with all that information. But by now, just to recap the first 2 lessons, you've classified resources, abiotic, biotic, renewable, non-renewable. You've looked at 3 specific case studies where we exploit resources, so deforestation in Cameroon, oil extraction in Ecuador, and the cod stocks in the North Sea. And today you've located different resources, specific ones like gold, diamonds, etc., and you've given me a reasons why each is located there. And on top of all of that, you've done some great examination skills. So you've been summarising information in lesson 1, and today's lesson you've been evaluating different ways to present data on maps. Okay, so loads and loads of geography going on the first 2 sessions of this topic. Thank you very much for listening. I'll see you next time for lesson 3 of Resources and Energy Resource Management. Cheerio.